Welcome back, everybody, to the Contech Exec Podcast. I'm your host, Robert Zimmerman. Today, I've got Kendall Hoyd with me from FairBuild AI. Kendall, welcome. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Robert. Thank you very much. Thanks for having me on the podcast.
Yeah, this is going to be a fun one. Just so you guys, a little background, Kendall sent me a couple of LinkedIn messages and telling me about all of the horror stories that he was, had to share. And I couldn't resist. But before we get to those stories, I want to know, Kendall, FairBuild AI, what is it? What are you doing with it? And is this where you're seeing all these horror stories, or are the horror stories the reasons why you started FairBuild?
Yeah, the answer to that last question is yes, because of lived horror stories.
Yeah, there you go.
So
Right.
my background is for the last 30 years, I've been either an owner, CEO, COO, or CFO of a building products or manufacturer or trade subcontractor. And the trades that I've been directly involved in, truss manufacturing, framing, roofing, flooring, cabinets, countertops, shower doors and mirrors, and solar.
There you go.
And so, early on in my career, I took over leading a small truss manufacturer when I was about 34. And I had some experience actually working for an international construction firm coming up to that, but I didn't have any experience in like the bare knuckles, commerce of doing projects, at at the personal scale. Let's put it
I
that way.
love that. I love that bare knuckles commerce. I want to use
Yeah.
that one. That's great.
And so, I got taken to the woodshed a couple of times early on by, I actually thought I had reviewed the agreements, but I hadn't reviewed them carefully enough. So there's kind of two pain points here. First and foremost was, just the risk and the pain of the loss when you get held to a language that came out in a way that you didn't envision.
Yeah.
And then secondly, when you decide to not let that happen again, well, now you're spending a ton of time on these agreements. And you probably know this, certainly when you're running a small business like a trade subcontractor, you don't have a lot of time to bury your head in a 30-page document for an afternoon.
It's the thing. That's the one thing that bites you, right? It's always that notion of, man, I just don't have the time. I think I've seen this before, but then all of a sudden, and the it's always the old saying, or it's the question, have you ever been bitten by an elephant? And everybody's, oh, well, no, but if you've certainly been bitten by a mosquito, it's the little things that get
Right.
you.
Yeah, exactly. And so, so I mean, I resolved after the last one was particularly painful. My losing end of being on the losing end of one of these controversies, I resolved to never let that happen again, and I didn't. But the time it took out of the more urgent part of my job was meaningful. And there wasn't really an answer for it. There just was no other way to do it. You couldn't afford to hire a lawyer to review every agreement that comes across your desk when you're doing $50 contracts. Maybe if it gets up around $500,000 or $1 million, you start to get to a range where that might make sense. But that's if you're in specialty trades, you don't see that all that often. It's usually in the, under $500,000, at least in my experience.
Well, and I think it's funny because there's a lot of talk on it, especially on LinkedIn. Most of the active LinkedIn conversations are talking about really, really large jobs, right? And they're talking about all the things that are involved in very, very large jobs, and it's scalable, right? And you'll have a general counsel probably in-house and those kind of things. But mid-market contractors, small market contractors, they don't have any of this, but they still have a lot of the same problems that the big guys run into. They just don't have the personnel that would be able to maybe help them avoid that risk.
Exactly right. And you end up in this very painful situation where you have to sacrifice time that's crucial to running the business, but but you don't have the option to ignore it because the consequences of that are dire and very painful. And so there was no good answer for it. And until I started, I was pretty early subscriber to ChatGPT. I was fascinated by that. And about the same time, I met some people that are now my technical partners on a number of AI development projects that I started brainstorming with them about this idea. And it seemed to me like we could build a tool that would, this technology could take that risk off the table and not take an afternoon or a better part of a day to do it, and
Right.
not have to pay a lawyer 500 to $1,000. So
Right.
that was the
So
genesis of the idea.
so therein lies the ideas or the some of the pain points behind the kind of the journey to fair build, right? So give me just a quick synopsis. Let the folks know here. What does fair build do? If you were given the elevator pitch, what does it do?
Okay. Yeah. So what it does is it's a contract intelligence platform that we built, and it is built specific to analyze only one thing, which is, well, two things: subcontracts and supply agreements that are provided to subcontractors and suppliers. And it does them from only one perspective, which is a subcontractor or supplier's perspective.
I see.
And we created that perspective. One of my partners is a 30-year construction lawyer. He's, been on every kind of dispute between general contractors, suppliers, and subcontractors. And he and we've known each other about that same amount of time. And so we work together on, on a framework that sits over the top of a language model that what it does is it runs every contract through our framework, which is 52 what we call axioms. So
Hmm.
we've identified, 52 areas where contracts create risk for our customers, subcontractors and suppliers. And when it finds language in these agreements that is objectionable compared to what our axiom says, then it calls it out for the user. And then I think that probably the most valuable piece of this is it explains it in in plain English.
Right.
You're reading one of these things, and you've seen these agreements that the lawyers jargonize them to the maximum extent they can. I think it's part of the profession. And so they can be really difficult, even if you're experienced at it, to parse those things out. Well, the model does that in minutes, and then gives you a plain language explanation of what that risk is and what it means, and then gives you a red line option to propose to your customer. You can say, I want to fight that battle or I don't, and include it or not include it. At the end, it gives you a red line version of the contract based on your selections of the issues you want to contest or negotiate to send back to your customer.
Well, speaking of lawyers, mine just texted me. Just randomly, we were talking about that. It's like- I was like, yeah, I'll get back with you. Don't worry about that. I'll get back with you. So, well, that's good. Again, it's a service that folks need that are in these situations that don't have the time for it. So,
And
you know,
yeah, and there are other AI options out there, but they're not really very affordable for a
mhm,
for a subcontractor. Again, somebody who's got a 30, 40, $50 million business. You don't want those kind of businesses probably have a hard time coughing up 10 or 15,000 bucks a year for this service. We're considerably less than that. And so and to be honest, Robert, I might be the oldest software company founder. Certainly I'm the oldest one I've seen on LinkedIn. But part of this is a mission for me. Like I've always been a little bit of an underdog supporter. I've always taken the side of David and in David and Goliath, and I want to make a difference here. I want to make this. I want people to use this tool. If enough people start to use it, then the dynamic changes, and that's the end game for me is as much as anything.
I like that because I think so. I've written a series called the Shock Absorber series is about a lot about the coercion economy that is really involved in construction, right? I call it the coercion economy, not because it's a bad thing. It's just how we've developed our relationships over the years. A bad contract here, a scope of work gone awry here, litigation over here. And so we've kind of built this shell around, well, I'm going to put this language in the contract in order to get you to do it the way that I want it done. And then it's coercion, right? It's like, if you want to get paid, you're going to have to do it my way. And by the way, the contract says you have to do it this way. And then it's this constant, looking for points of leverage instead of maybe looking towards how do we get this thing built, properly the first time, right? Those kind of
Right.
things.
Yeah.
And the focus has gone, I believe, in the wrong direction. Again, I've talked about it before where, you've got a contract and or a general contractor, somebody that's focused on the project and not the asset. They're focused on their first call as to what does the contract say instead of what's best for the project. How do we make this happen? If the subcontractor is right, right? Instead, what happens is we don't check and see if the subcontractor is right. We check the contract and they go, well, doesn't matter if he's right or not, right? Here's what it says. Okay. And so I think that's a big deal. Part of that is all of it is our fault. And when it's everybody's fault, it's nobody's fault, right? It's what I call it's baked into this system that we have now, and we're all trying to find a way to deal with it. The struggle is for I'll say the younger or the smaller outfits or the mid-market outfits is to your point, they got a lot less time because they're shorter staffed. Their bandwidth is very, very thin for these kind of events. And when these events happen, right, that's even worse, right? It's not even about the prevention portion of it. It is the long tail after it's all started, right? These events happen as a spike, but they've got this really long tail, it seems.
It's torturously long. It's unbelievably long.
So speaking of that, let's talk about the kind of you said you had some horror stories here. Let's go ahead share maybe one or two with us, and we can kind of.
I will do that, but first I want to address your point about how things have evolved in construction, and I think that here's my observation. The business has definitely consolidated especially over the last 15 years, and my observation over a 40-year career is that when principals deal with each other, you can have back and forth, you can have accommodation, you can have a relationship, and you can have teamwork. But when you get in a situation that we're talking about, general contractor is a big organization. The people running the project have bosses. Those bosses probably have bosses, but you got principals on the side of on the subcontractor side. And so, but it becomes hard to have those principal to principal exchanges that build relationships when one of the parties is a multi-level management structure organization, and because those people don't have the same authority to make those kind of decisions.
Yeah,
So
it comes down to that. It's not only authority but accountability, right? There's no accountability structure in place, so therefore they really can't make a decision, right?
yeah,
It's this strange dynamic that we've come up with that said, you're in charge of this product, but run everything by me.
exactly.
Yeah. And then we wonder why we have bottlenecks, right? And we wonder why we have these execution points that never get executed. And it's funny because we're designing systems, we're designing technological systems, that try to digitize all this same information, and it's not a digital problem, right?
You're right.
It's a human issue. It's a process. I've got no authority to make this decision. I don't care how much data you give somebody. Procore wants to give me all the data on all the RFIs that are happening on this said job. If I have zero authority to take care of any of it, it does me no good.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. You've just sped up the rate at which you can get to the bottleneck, basically.
That's right. Yeah. You've recognized, yes, you have recognized the bottleneck, but it's what do you do when you get there? And then this goes to that whole conversation of, institutional knowledge. Have you been through this before? Have you made the mistakes? Kendall, you and I probably we could build the house on the sawdust we've had to chew. It's like, it's like we've been through it, we understand it, so if you give me that information or give you that information, you would probably know what to do with it and make a decision. But if you're in that middle ground and all you're doing is making a phone call to your boss.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, it's a different, so it's a situation that creates risk in the end, because when the boss also has a boss, everybody in that chain is worrying about what the guy that they report to is going to think of their decision. And,
Yeah. Well,
and they're going to get second guessed.
yeah, well, even worse is the do nothing today because I don't want to hear it.
Right. Yeah.
We've been
Yeah.
there before. I didn't want to tell you because, well, It's Friday
I was
and
hoping it'd go away.
right. Yeah. Yeah. I didn't want to I've had that happen before running work and, things were going on the job site and it was kind of a, oh, hey, by the way. And I'm like, yeah, that would have been really nice to know about 2 hours ago, but before we started down this other road.
Right.
But again, those are the situations that happen, right? This is the reason why we've created some of these systems and kind of tried to insulate ourselves somehow from we tried to insulate ourselves with risk, but it seems like we've just created other types of risk.
Yeah. And what it does is it pushes it downstream. And again, hence the mission of FairBuild is the risk gets pushed downstream to the people who don't have lawyers. And that's where it resides right now. And, so to your question about the horror stories, there's a couple that come to mind. One is a subcontractor that had just signed an agreement without reviewing it and unwittingly agreed to a pay if paid situation with the general contractor. Well, the general contractor ended up in a suit with the owner with under claims of failing to build to plans and specification. And so when the GC got sued, they in turn sued the subcontractor under their indemnity and withheld a $300,000 final payment and their retention. So, we're talking about close to $500,000, something like that. And the way it works out in court is because of the lawsuit and the invocation of the indemnity, the insurance company hires a lawyer to defend the subcontractor in that suit. As part of getting through that case, the lawyer has no interest in the subcontractor's outcome. The lawyers, they're hired by the insurance company. In the end, what they do in order to get out of the indemnity claim is they give up the retention and the final payment that were due to the subcontractor. So the insurance company gets out without paying on that claim. Subcontractor is holding the bag for what could be a company ending amount of money. I don't, that particular company, I don't think it was, that fatal to them, but obviously that could change the whole arc of the life of that organization.
I mean, cash flow's king here. And so that kind of non-cash flow on a job that you've done work on, again, you're the bank at the subcontractor end, you're the bank for the job. And that pay if paid clause, man, that's a tough one to swallow, really.
Yeah, it's Yeah, and so I have another one that's related, similar to that one, that I lived this one personally. I took over as president of a flooring subcontractor in Southern California. We were doing a big multifamily job, and we had a general contractor that had been paying for about probably good for about a year. But then all of a sudden, the owner ran into financial trouble. The financial structure of the project stopped working, and so the owner stopped paying the general contractor. And this is a situation where um, the agreement had been signed before I, became the leader of the organization, before I joined it. So I joined it, inheriting an unreviewed set of contract risks.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I call the general contractor and I say, look, you got to pay us. And well, I can't pay you. The owner's not paying me. I go, okay, then I'm pulling off the job. He says, well, maybe you want to read that agreement because you're a breach of contract if you do that. So
Yeah.
I'm not getting paid. I have a continued performance requirement under my agreement with the general contractor. So in order to avoid that and all of the breach of contract claims that come with it, I end up working out another $180,000 worth of installation cost. So like 6 or 7 months. And at the end, we filed a lien and took another year of machinations with all the other creditors to get part of our money back minus our legal fees. So it's one of those situations where there's some things that I just don't sign up for anymore. I don't care.
Yeah, and again, it's the coercion economy. Like I said, it's like I've got you over a barrel. You might want to go check your contract. I don't know how many times that has been spoken. Those words have been. You might want to check your contract.
Right.
But yeah, and it happens all the time. I randomly remember having a conversation with a fairly large residential builder in the area here, and this is a long time ago, and he literally said to me because I was wanting to do some subcontract work on it, And he might have been drinking that day. I don't know. Maybe it had a little too much whiskey, but he literally honestly said to me, he goes, "You don't know how many times you know, I just I think we were having a candid conversation." He goes, "You don't know how many times I send subcontractors' bills back as misbilled." And it's not because they're misbilled. It's because he didn't have the funds or wasn't paid by said client just yet. What the draw, his draw wasn't in, so their draw wasn't in. So instead of invoking the whole better go read your contract language, he would just send the invoices back and go, "Yeah, it's misbilled.
Yeah,
Try again next week."
it's a soft power version of the same thing. Yeah.
I was just I was first of all, I was flabbergasted a little bit. I didn't try I tried not to show my cards like, "You son of a gun," kind of thing. But I was just like, I'm literally trying to go I'm asking you about thinking about doing business with you, and you just told me straight up that you're probably gonna try to screw me, at least for a couple weeks. I'm gonna have to hold your note. You know what I mean? I'm gonna have to fund your job or whatever that is. Needless to say, I didn't do any work with him, but, I just found it so surprising. It seemed so brazen to me at the time where he just basically admitted, "Yeah, that's how we do it. Sorry."
Yeah, and, and that in residential work, that's kind of more the exception than the rule. You actually, if times are good, when times are bad, nobody gets paid. But when times are good, the labor, what the subcontractors are providing is so heavily dependent on labor, and labor needs to get paid every week. That my experience is, probably my average days to get paid on residential work over my 30 years of doing this is probably 35 or something like that. My average days to get paid on a commercial job or a multifamily job is 56. And, because of the project financing structure, the way that's built,
Yeah, I think it's size. Yeah, it's size-wise there, right? You know that your subs can't perform. In the residential sector, your subs are smaller, they can't perform, they can't continue to perform without the cash, so
yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, I think that that's another thing that, if you like not reviewing these agreements, you've probably given away somewhere in the mid single digits of margin just off the top. The way you're financing the project and the cost of that financing, your limitations on change order markups, your being subject to schedule whims and changes, all the other variations on the job site that can be, if you don't protect yourself, you're completely at their mercy. You can lose. This is on a job where everything goes right. You're going to make 5% less than you thought you would.
mhm. Yeah, the scariest line to me was on a set of drawings was the errors and omissions clause, that was, always thrown in there by the architects and the engineers, which basically would always say, "Hey, by the way, if you don't find the errors and omissions and won't," and don't tell us in a timely manner or whatever, you know what I mean? You're gonna eat it,
Yeah. That,
basically.
yeah. They're transferring design responsibility to you in that
Yeah,
case. You
yeah,
just became the designer
yeah.
and you don't have
I
instructions.
became the editor of the designer at least,
Yeah.
and I have had to be that several times. I don't know how many different sets of drawings that I've handed back to, and I'm not to say that again, these are exceptions to the rule. Maybe other people have these same kind of stories, but I get the pressure that, the AEC, kind of group is underneath. I get it. I see that they're under pressure. They've only got so many hours to apply. They've got a budget as well that they really can't go over, and so they have to deliver a set of drawings, and there's going to be shortcomings in every one of them.
That's the piece that has been most, it's a continual source of amazement to me, is for lack of another 25% on the drawings budget, every other trade, every other sub is now, you know, on their back foot. The chances of things going sideways at that point go up by like 50%, 100%, because the drawings in the end are, they define everyone's scope, and you put mistakes in there just snowball, they
It's one of my biggest pet peeves.
yeah.
It is the thing. It's part of the shift of the industry, right? Not to mention the way that the contracts have been designed. So the contracts, I was looking this up the other day, have been around since like 1886. Like AIA was formed back in 1886 at some point in time. It started these contracts to make this kind of fair interaction between owner, designer, contractor, right? They're trying to make this fair. And since then, it's always tried to keep it fair, but the clauses keep, getting more and more convoluted. And I had a conversation with the folks from First Rule about this, and he made a fair point about, we have to make broad language because we have a lot of area to cover on these things. So made a fair point. But again, we're taking things that were designed back in a day when, a handshake deal probably would have survived, right? But a few things went south, and then all of a sudden it snowballed into this thing. It's the same thing with our planning stage. We've taken the part that's probably most important and we've shrunk it, we've condensed it into this, small segment and put a price tag on it, right? We said, I'm only spending this much on the design, go. And I'm only spending this much on the design, but I'll pay this much extra on the build. They're paying, I never did understand the logic. They're paying the extra on the part that's most expensive.
Yeah, and the ROI on that, on the savings on the drawings has got to be like negative 1000%. I mean, you know, it's you pay for that from that point forward, it seems to me.
I would think that would be a fantastic, an interesting study as to what somebody paid for their set of, plans versus what they paid out in,
Change order?
revisions, change orders, scope, uh, scope creep, those types of things. Like, again, or even scheduling errors due to a
Yeah,
poor set of plans.
right. And so, our point of view is you're walking into an environment that is structurally that way. Like you're structurally accepting the risks of that project scope definition and its execution. Regardless of what the contract says, you are agreeing to operate under those in that environment, under those risks. If you are going to agree to do that under an agreement, which in turn layers even more risk on top of you, you're really you're in a rough spot. Our mission is to say, yeah, construction is tough, it's difficult, and you're going to have a hard time making money, you know, under the best of circumstances. Don't go into it on your back foot with respect to terms and conditions and, subject add even more to that risk when you don't have to.
Yeah. I think it's interesting to think about how far we've come with all the different language and the industry standards and all this. Like I was talking about earlier, how all this kind of stuff has gotten baked into our processes, and then now in the age of, well, I'll say the age of information or the age of AI, we're starting to get smart. And we're starting to see, because there's more exposure as to what's going on behind the scenes. I was just did something the other day. It talked about, is the labor shortage real, or is it just because the subs are turning more jobs down? And I don't know. I mean, ABC and AGC have done studies that basically say, yes, there's a real labor shortage, and I probably should look into those numbers. But I think it's interesting to find out that 50% of these jobs that are out there right now have been turned down by some of these subcontractors who are just like, yeah, it's not worth our time. They're becoming
Right. Yeah, having been in that situation continuously, basically up until about 3 or 4 months ago, I would tell you it's pretty real. Like hiring skilled tradespeople that can do the work at a high level.
difficult.
Most companies are now trying to figure out how to create a pipeline of most of the mature ones, at least trying to figure out how to create a pipeline themselves. You didn't used to have to worry about that.
Yeah. Yeah. We could go back to the hall and pick up who we needed. I come from the union side of the world. I was a union carpenter, journeyman carpenter for 10 years. So you could go back to the hall, find some good guys, what I mean, that were looking for work, put them on your job, and you could count on them, right? Same thing with electricians unions, the plumbers unions, pipe fitters. You could go to the hall and go, this guy's got experience. We know he can do the job. He might be a total jerk, but we know he can do the job.
He knows what you're in the hammer to hold.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and that, I was just talking about that today to somebody about, this is a rough business and there's a lot of rough language that I don't think that, the, I'll say the more office world gets. It's necessary at a level that they don't understand. Like you're you're dealing with rough people in a rough business in a rough environment. Guess what? That is going to exist. Our rough edges are not going to come off. It's just not
It's
going to
bare
happen.
knuckle commerce.
Yes, bare knuckle commerce. Absolutely. Yeah, that's great. So, what are plans for, fair build? What's the market here? You're looking for mid-market contractors that looking into your platform. What's the plans for the future?
Yeah, our target market is trade subcontractors and building material suppliers that do business under formal agreements with their customers.
Mhm.
So that probably puts us, by our estimation, the sweet spot of our market probably operates between 15 and $100 million a year in revenue. And they have that's enough. They're doing business in big enough slugs that they have formal agreements, but they're not big enough to have lawyers on staff. And their customers are much bigger than they are, and so they're at a disadvantage with respect to these agreements and their ability to just the workflow of processing them. They're at a
Yeah.
disadvantage.
They're big enough to
FairBuild,
do the work, but big enough to do the work, but maybe not quite big enough to really assess the risk.
right? Exactly. So, and that's where FairBuild's like really what it is it's a workflow accelerator.
Mhm.
When that contract comes in, you've probably been in this situation before or seen it, but and you're a subcontractor, the GC is saying, yeah, I really need to get this signed by Friday so we can get this thing kicked off.
Yeah.
And you got it on Tuesday when you've got other things to do between now and
Yeah.
then.
Yeah, you have 15 other fires to put
Right.
out.
Yeah. And so for that reason, subcontractors have largely either lightly reviewed these agreements or not reviewed them, signed them and sent them back and hope for the best. And we think it's better for the industry as a whole, not just the subcontractors, if this negotiation becomes a little bit more of there's more parity in it.
Right. Yeah, I had that conversation with a friend of mine I'm doing business with the other day. I've got a small little carpentry company that he and I do business work with, and he calls me up and he says, "Hey man, I can't do this meeting today." He goes, I got one burning. I just got a contract hit my desk. I've got to have it out by, Friday." And I think it was Wednesday or something like that.
Yeah.
He goes, and I get it. This is what happens. I've seen it 1,000 times, right? Where this contract hits your desk and they're like, "Hey, by the way, this was a hot one. Can you get it to me by such and such?" And when you're in that business and you're in that market, you almost a lot of times you can't really afford to pass it up because you're afraid
Yeah.
that you may not get considered for a bid on the next one.
Right.
Or
Or, you just need pipeline. I mean, everybody needs pipeline. And
yeah,
it's never guaranteed. So, yeah, and so in that situation, you can't even call a lawyer. If you got 2 days, you're not gonna get that back in 2 days if you send it to a
no,
lawyer.
no, because they've got backlogs too, and I think that's what's interesting is everybody thinks that in the world of fast food, everything should be fast. It's fast food this, fast food that, quick
That's
this,
right,
quick
yeah.
that. Thinking about the age of AI, we'll kind of close on this because we're in it. That fast food mentality, does it get worse or does it get better?
Yeah, I think about that a lot actually, because I'm at an age stage in life where I maybe contemplate things philosophically from time to time. But, I think like a lot of things like this, it will it's hard to imagine from our current perspective, it not being worse. But I think what happens is your context around it shifts. And I think, in the end, I have a belief in, to be honest, in democracy and capitalism. Like, I think we'll figure it out. I think that, I think that it'll be ugly and we'll probably, what Winston Churchill said one time about the United States, he said, you can always count on the United States to do the right thing after every other option has been exhausted. And and I think we'll go through that process too. We'll probably make a lot of mistakes, but I think the benefit of our system and our underlying structure is that we're built to be resourceful and to adapt.
Yeah, the necessity being the mother of all invention, right?
Yeah, yeah,
We do have a tendency to wait until it's absolutely necessary before we before we make the changes. We're seeing it now, kind of in real time. We're having to
absolutely.
make some changes for the age of AI. I think we're going to have to make a lot of serious changes in how we do things, simply because it's being monitored in a totally different way.
Yeah.
the digital structure of the world, the digital structure of technology in itself demands a bit more precise definition of what we're doing.
Yeah, for sure. And a recognition that this is going to be incredibly beneficial to some people and incredibly harmful to others. And that's something that we've got to take into account as we navigate our way through it.
Yeah, I don't know that there's I don't know that there's any technology that it's ever come out. And I've heard the argument, and I don't know if I agree. I'm still on the fence about it. I've heard the argument though, like the cotton gin, the tractor, these things, technology at any level has displaced people at some level or their function, whatever they do, whether intentionally or unintentionally, it does happen. I do think we're at a stage in our evolution where we can actually make a choice and actually control what that looks like. Whether we decide to or not is going to be another
Yeah.
question.
Yeah, I think that, as a society, we're looking back at, like early 2000s and the trade and decisions and policies that we made. I think if we had that to do over again, we'd do it differently.
Sure.
And so, now's another time where we're on the cusp of a similarly, maybe even more disruptive change agent in society and in the economy. And, now's the time to rethink, our principles about that.
Well, yeah, I think one of the big difference makers is the availability of information as compared to, the year of 2000 or 2008 or the 1988 or whatever. The availability of information really does make a difference in how we react. Some people overreact and you see it, but over the course of time, even the overreactions, kind of like the hill hits a crest and then it levels out. I think the information that we're getting will level us out in a way that maybe we'll come to a good consensus on
Yeah.
some of these
I
important.
I I believe in that. You
I
could
do
make the
too.
argument that the history of America is nothing but a series of overreactions.
Knee-jerk reactions to it. Why do we do that? Well, let's do this instead. Totally different. Yeah, I love it. Well, Kendall, time flies when you're having fun. How do folks get a hold of you if they want to check out your product or just rap with you about what's going on in the world of FairBuild?
Well, FairBuild AI is our website. I can be found on LinkedIn. You can also just email me.
Mhm.
My email is kendall@fairbuild.ai. Happy to have this discussion with anybody who's interested. So, like I said, this is not just a business idea for me. This is a mission. I really kind of would like to. This probably be the last thing I really put a lot of this type of energy into. I would really like for it to be something that sort of changes the overall dynamic and how the construction. Because I think in the end, I think it's good for the whole construction industry, not just subcontractors, if we have more parity in these agreements.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think the more transparency and parity that we've got in these things, the better off we're going to be. So I appreciate what you do. Folks, we've come to the end of it all here for today. Kendall, thank you for being with me. Really do appreciate it. If you are a subcontractor, supplier, or you know somebody that is, you know, just put the word out. The reasons why we do these podcasts is not just because I enjoy, rapping with people that I'd probably never meet in my life and, having great conversations, but it's also to share it with you and so that you can share it with other people. We're hoping that this information helps. We're hoping that this information informs, does what it's supposed to do. So we hope we'll share this with you. And until the next time, we'll see you on the Contact Exec